A very good evening to all of you in India, and good morning to our friends in the United States. It's indeed my proud privilege to welcome all of you to this Nishith Desai Associates initiated important debate on the future of Parliament. I want to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers whose names have already been mentioned by Devanshi. In addition to that, I want to share with you that in the next few days, we also have Dr. Shashi Tharoor, a very distinguished parliamentarian who will also be joining us, and Mr. Nalin Kohli, who is an advocate in the Supreme Court, but also the spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party. He will also be joining us next few days. Our theme continues to be the same. It is about the future of the Parliament, and particularly Parliament in the cloud, reinventing democracy. And we will essentially continue the discussions that we began a few days ago. I will start by saying that one of the things that this particular COVID-19 crisis has created is it has helped us all to reimagine and even challenge existing framework of institutions. We are looking at to what extent this can potentially and maybe fundamentally change the way we look at things. I believe Thomas Friedman a few weeks ago wrote that we will be looking at this part of the world's history by pre-corona and post-corona. Now, whether that is the case or not, posterity will tell, but it's a perfect opportunity for us to think about how we can refashion existing institutions with a view to make them more effective, but most importantly, more connected to the people. With those words, I have great pleasure in inviting Mr. Alexander Bard to make his presentation. I request him to speak for, say, approximately 20 minutes or so, and then we will have Mr. Shekhar Kapur, and then we'll continue the discussion. But before I do that, I request Nishith to say a few words.
I think what you said is enough. Everybody is anxious to hear Alexander Bard. All that I would say is this is a real opportunity for us to think how to change the world for the better. And as I mentioned in my earliest communications, that the whole concept of democracy has undergone change from Socrates and Plato, Aristotle to Athenian-style direct democracy to 930 AD. We had Iceland going for representative parliament. Now it's 1100 years, and now we need to revisit the model and see whether it is functioning the way in which it was originally envisaged, or is it delivering those results. And in some surveys it came out that majority of the people are not happy or satisfied with the way in which the democracy is functioning at this point in time. Not that they are against democracy, but they are in favor of looking for a change. And as I mentioned earlier, democracy today, representative democracy is about agency system, where members of parliament act as agents and have power of attorney for 5 years. You can't revoke that. And technology is all about disintermediation. So how can technology function? Also, in same terms, I think we are going to have some people making presentation as to how technology would be at least apparently be on the hands of the government and or the other institutions. So I think new technologies like Unstoppable and Aragon and others are coming out, creating new kind of communities, and the whole concept of nation state would also undergo change. And actually, I remember, I think Business Week of 2000 Millennium Issue at that time, it was said that in the next century there'll be 2000 nations. One thing is whole concept of nation state may disappear in 40, 50, 60 years. On the other hand, the countries may become smaller and smaller, more and more breakup because of the small states being able to do as good as the big ones. And as even in India, let us look at when we got our independence, we had how many states? 14. Today, how many? 30, And same way, small states like countries like Singapore and others, with their smart technology, management systems and administration and all that, have done fabulous job, because you don't need a landmass to prosper, because you can invest in any other landmass today. And we fought many wars, hundreds of years, and won territories, and after winning the territory or acquiring territory or maintaining the territory, what do? We sell them to the corporates which are owned by former enemies, and we still work together, So whole fight that we had and killed thousands of people, and just to make sure that the world is still globalized, I think is it all worth it? And we have to revisit some of those basic things, that how much we spend on our defense, how much we spend on healthcare, education, and stuff like that. I mentioned last time that we in India spend about $60 billion every year on defense, 15 billion on education, and 10 billion on healthcare. I think we just need to revisit and see, is this a good proportion? Because in the war, no one wins, only no country wins, only the companies win, as they say at times. So I think these are some of the thoughts, Ali. I don't want to take away more interesting talk from Alexander, and of course Tim spoke a lot last time, and we would also love to hear him after Tim and Shekhar have spoken. So back to you, Raj.
Thank you so much, Nishith, for really setting the stage again. Now I call upon Alexander to make his presentation. Over to you, Alexander.
Icelandic. So I come from the Nordic part of Europe. So I hope that qualifies as being a representative of an old culture of distributed power, which is, I guess, what democracy means: distributed and decentralized. So what I would say about the corona pandemic and its effect currently is that it doesn't really change, I think, any of the topics we're going to discuss here, but it will certainly speed them up. The process is speeded up. I mean, I've worked with technology for the past 30 years. As a philosopher, I am a philosopher of the relationship between human beings and technology. And certainly a lot of the major macro trends we've been predicting for the past 30 years are now happening at a very rapid speed. So I would start there. Let me just start by saying that power in any kind of society at any given time in history usually comes in three different angles. The first one is the one we in philosophy call real power, because it's really about the control over the assets, over the values in that specific society. So that would have been the feudal society. That would have been whoever had access to land ownership, who controlled the land itself, would have had the real power in that sense. There would have been an aristocracy, for example. Over the past 400 years, we've developed the modern industrial capitalist society, where, of course, capital itself has taken that role. So whoever has the money has an enormous amount of power to begin with. We call this capitalism. And this is the real power. There's also the imaginary power, and this is way more important than it sounds when we say imaginary. Imaginary power is usually what comes to mind when we say who has the power. And today, this obviously would be, say, the president of the United States or the prime minister of India, or anybody who's really powerful in a representative role of any kind. This would have been royalty in the past. So like if you decided, it would have been the kings and the queens and the courts that surrounded them, and this would have been the imaginary power. We have replaced that, of course, with politicians and politics, and we've basically arrived at two different systems. One of them is the communist China one-party state, and the other one is the standard for sort of a global democracy today, which is like anybody who has any sort of national territory where people have a shared culture, where people at least read the same morning newspapers and watch the same television channels. That usually would be like something we call a nationality, and based on that, you can base a democracy. So that's imaginary power. The third power is basically the control over the narrative and over the production of the official truth. So you can see that these powers sort of influence each other. But the third one is important, is that symbolic power. That would have been in the past, that would have been religions, churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, different religious and philosophical ideas would have been part of symbolic power. But symbolic power was then replaced by academia. So in the industrial capitalist age, we replaced that with academia because we trust academics to come up with the official truth. We think a professor's title adds credibility to his statement. Whenever footnotes are used, even today in Wikipedia, they usually refer to a respectable newspaper, preferably even a book, some kind of library, and the organized storage of information in a way that we find acceptable in any society, right? So we have these three powers fundamentally. So we talk about parliament here. We are basically talking about an aspect of the imaginary power. And this is, of course, whoever sets the law. And of course, law in turn controls land, law in turn controls capital. And increasingly, in the kind of society we're moving into now, it's going to be a war over attention, because we're moving into a very medialized world when the internet takes over the world. And we basically just right now, we're pushing almost all the 8 billion people on the planet online, right? And we're doing so increasingly due to the corona pandemic. So our first book, The Netocrats, that came out 20 years ago, that I co-wrote with Jan Söderqvist, dealt with this paradigm shift from the industrial capitalist society onto an informationalist and attentionalist society. That means all the three previous centers of power will be replaced by new real, new imaginary, and new symbolic powers over time. And of course, the first one of these is the control of real power today, and that is data. It's the collection and the processing of data. And eventually that will lead towards artificial intelligence, etc. And we all know by now that, you know, all the stock exchanges of the world have fallen with some 20-25% over the last 3 months, except for NASDAQ, which has gone up. And I don't think there should be any doubt, once we're out of the corona pandemic, that Jeff Bezos, who is the head of Amazon, which is the new East India company, essentially, is now way more powerful than the president of the United States. So we can agree on that there's been a dramatic shift of power and influence in the world, which has been speeded up. And basically in India, that means a lot more power moves to places like Bangalore rather than, you know, necessarily Delhi. Certainly in America, power moves from Washington, D.C. over to, say, San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and on, especially to Seattle and the other tech capitals of North America. We see the same trend in Europe. Tech is eating everything. So this means technology is taking over the world in a fundamental sense, and it takes over all these three different powers. We're increasingly looking for YouTube these days rather than going to boring lectures at university. We find all the world's best lecturers on YouTube these days, and smart students have realized this a long time ago, and they're basically just seeing universities as test centers, etc. So we're seeing a shift into a new real power, which is data and data processing. There certainly needs to be a new imaginary power here, because the politics in itself is shrinking. The influence of politics is shrinking. I think the reason why Donald Trump won the last election in America was that it's simply seen as, well, whoever we pick is the imaginary power these days, or at least the president of the United States. He could at worst make damage, but he couldn't really create any new value in that position any longer, because technology has taken over that role. But we also need new symbolic powers eventually that create a new narrative. And this new narrative is what connects us to one another. And that's where I come in as a philosopher. It's the kind of work that I do when I travel around the world with my team, and we go to India and we go to other places, and we try to find new narratives that work. And I give you a perfect example of that. We are all in the world today obviously moving towards something that we philosophers call a sensocracy. Okay? Sensocracy beats everything else we've known before when it comes to distribution and control of power and how power is executed. What sensocracy means is that we're going to have so many sensors everywhere. We're going to have the sensors in the seas. We're going to have sensors in the skies. We're going to have sensors in our homes, our apartments, our workplaces, you know, when we go shopping, everywhere there are going to be sensors. And these, and obviously our smartphones and our laptops are sensors in this sense. We also have our own human senses. That's why we call it sensocracy. So the connection between the human senses, our own bodies and our own minds, being connected with one another, 8 billion people connected to one another, hundreds of billions of objects around us, the Internet of Things connecting one another, creates a global system of interconnectivity. And I think the advantages from this sensocracy are going to be so tremendous that will be irresistible for us to say no. But you probably understand by now that we're already seeing now, for example, in communist China, that we have enormous problems with this sensocracy, especially when it's applied by a one-party state during a pandemic. And that's exactly why the difference in sensocracy right now in East Asia, the two different alternatives that are occurring there during the corona pandemic, are of such interest to us as philosophers, because we work now in Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan to see if we can develop an idea of a sensocracy when actually we have data about absolutely everything in a society. But at the same time, we must keep the society free and open, decentralized, and have the data distributed. Now, I think the way it will go is that, number one, already when we use Google today, for example, our data is depersonified. Google has really no interest in finding out that it's me that picking the data from, but they're interested in finding out that there are possibly 300,000 other men like me living in major cities the way I do around the world with similar tastes and preferences that I have, so they can predict what I want or where I want to go, what I want to do with my life, what my needs and my wants are. That's what the big tech companies want to predict. They don't necessarily want that from me. But when it comes to politics, for example, or when it comes to judiciary institutions, they would certainly be very interested in finding out that it's me. This is all about me. These are my personal data connected to me as a person. So the problem we have here is that it's very, very tempting for the power institutions in contemporary society to try to use this sensocracy and obviously go towards a dictatorship. That is certainly the dream of communist China today. It's even the official ideology of China today. And we owe the Chinese a response coming from India, coming from Europe, coming from North America, and coming from the rest of East Asia. We owe them a response from the countries that have introduced democracy and believed in democracy over the past 50 to 100 years to go back and answer the honest question, which is, how do you respond to a sensocracy that wants to be totalitarian, authoritarian, which is very easy if all the data in any culture like communist China goes all the way into the Communist Party central computer and store there, which is essentially what Chinese tech companies are forced to do. That's why we don't want to have Huawei phones any longer, because you don't want to be part of that system, right? So can then a free and open sensocracy, can that happen? And why I'm saying sensocracy or even kills democracy is that democracy in the sense that I go to a voting booth once every 4 years and vote for somebody to represent me in a parliament is essentially a dead idea if I am voting every second in my life anyway through my behaviors, which is what I do in a sensocracy, which is what you do today when you put yourself in a car, you drive from point A to point B, and you find out where the traffic jams are on the way, because Android phones will then submit data from each other, and suddenly you will see where the traffic jams are and who's stuck in that traffic jam to begin with. So the benefits of sensocracy, especially now looking at a pandemic and looking in hindsight that the next pandemic, when that happens, it could be even worse, could be handled much better if you have more data. And if that data is processed more intelligently than it was this time around. Because actually, we don't even have proper statistics considering the corona pandemic in the world, which just goes to show that the World Health Organization are completely bypassed already. Nobody cares about what they say, because you get better information from any tech company these days you get from the World Health Organization, which speaks volumes about the change we're already doing towards this sensocracy. But the question is then back to, if sensocracy is taking over the world, is taking over politics, is taking over lawmaking, is taking over the fundamental control over any given society, where could that possibly lead us? Well, two things. The first thing is that technology itself does not want to work on a nation state level. It doesn't even work on a city state level, where actually the most profitable and successful people are living these days, because places like Singapore and Mauritius and Dubai are handling the current crisis better than India or the United States. No, technology itself wants to be imperial and global. So Jan Söderqvist and I wrote a book already 17 years ago called The Global Empire. And what we say in the global empire, technology itself already has its global constitution. It's called the Internet Protocol. So technology in itself undeniably wants to be global. The more the different clouds around the world can combine data with one another, the more data they will have and the more intelligent they will be. So technology is undeniably moving there. That's why the interest in imperium, in the idea of creating systems, for example, trade routes throughout history and standards, international standards, and how do different nations negotiate with each other? How do you reach peace settlements and avoid armed conflict? All of those things are of intense interest today for us today, because they're imperial theory. But I think for human beings, as we are tribal creatures, we are only comfortable in a format with a few hundred people around us who we can really trust. And it's really hard for us even to live in these huge megalopolises that we live in today, these huge cities with like millions and millions of people in them. Even that, because of crime and everything, and pollution, and we don't trust our neighbors. And it's really hard to make these systems sustainable. We know how much, for example, Delhi is fighting with that at the moment. That's because these systems are so large and contain so many human beings. So the question is, How do we then stretch the human imagination from the nation? Because I think there'll be more nations in the future rather than less. But how can these nations collaborate with technology on an imperial level? So artificial intelligence will go towards the imperial and the global, whereas we human beings will go even more towards the local. And we need to make these things match. And the other question is, what are the benefits of a free and open system here? And I would say it's going to be the fight over the algorithm that's going to be the absolute key. Because every one of us as an individual human being today using the internet, we have our own algorithm. And our algorithm is really tribal. It's created by us through our own behavior. It's created by the interaction with friends around the world that we make. Also with antagonists that will love to challenge us so we become smarter. And the more antagonists you can afford to have in your network, the less of an echo chamber it is, the more intelligent you'll be. And these algorithms, we really want to protect them. And when we discovered that corporations are trying to corrupt these algorithms, we put ad blockers in our web browsers right away, which is a very, very healthy human reaction. No. Don't come here and corrupt my algorithm. My algorithm is my guardian angel that guides me on the internet today. And that's how I build trust with other human beings, through my algorithm. And also, we don't want to be manipulated by politics. So when politics comes running and saying that we cannot let the internet be free and open because it must be contained and controlled because human beings cannot be trusted. There'll be criminals in no time, there'll be anarchy. And all these threats that we constantly get if we go out online today and do what we want, and it's called fake news, or we're accused of all kinds of things of the old power structures. We need to defend those things. And I believe over the next 10 years, I want to finish, I want to believe in the next 10 years, I believe in a new sort of global movement towards the free and open algorithm. It's kind of the new struggle for being a citizen today in a global sense, that I, as a person, as a human being, I'm being respected. So the algorithm is pure and clean and it's my own. And if I get that free and open algorithm, I can gladly involve myself in society, both on an imperial and national level, and vote and participate politically and everything, because I have a clean, pure algorithm. This is my own worldview that I co-create with my own friends out there in the world, and I can trust it.
Presentation. Thank you, Alexander, for that fascinating presentation, kicking off with the philosophical foundations of exercise of power. Before I get to Shekhar, I want to quickly ask you a question. How did you manage to reasonably predict in 2002 in your book on netocracy what are the nature and shape of things that are going to come after 2 decades? Because many things that you have said in it are beginning to take shape as we see the world today.
Okay, I saw the similarities with Paris in 1789, and they were striking. So this was clearly a paradigm shift. And in my philosophy, I work with 4 paradigms. So we can basically put human history into 4 different blocks. The first one is the fact that we can speak at all, and we can memorize and we speak. The second one is that we started writing 8,000 years ago, which is the basis for civilization itself, written language, and the information storage that goes with that. Then the printing press put Europe on the map in 1450 in Germany, and we all know that we had the 3 forthcoming centuries after that was the European Golden Age. Europe is now reduced to more marginal again, where it should be, I think. But we had the great age of Europe. Europe conquered the world because of the printing press, and then we all, through massification, spread the benefits that everybody could read, everybody could write, everybody could count in the world eventually through schooling and education, because the printing press made the distribution of information so cheap. Okay, so now with the internet, this is the 4th revolution in human history, because we're all connecting all these different machines to one another. And that is a revolution on such a massive scale that's going to motivate a shift of power completely. Because to be a winner online today, it's entirely different from running an efficient factory in Prussia in the 1830s. Okay, so that's why the predictions we made were all based on the idea 30 years ago that there are going to be a lot of mistakes made over the first 30 years of the internet, which is about until now, because people will use the old models to understand a brand new historical phenomenon, which is the internet, until finally by, say, 2020, which is about now, they'll get around to the point where they begin to understand the true revolution and what artificial intelligence and all these things really are. And the corona pandemic is just now speeding up that process very, very quickly.
Thank you so much, Alexander. We will come back to many other questions that your presentation has raised. And now I call upon Mr. Shekhar Kapur, who, of course, doesn't need any introduction, but we are indeed looking forward to your presentation. Shekhar.
Thank you. That was a great presentation, Alexander. Really, I'm still trying to process it all. And as Nishith knows, that he and I and a lot of us in India have been trying to predict the nature of technology and where it goes. And I have to say, we managed to predict YouTube, we managed to predict AI, we managed to predict a large part of the internet. What is it doing? Ultimately, what it seems to me is that the one thing that, of course, coronavirus has accelerated that, but we always know that as we move into greater technology, we are moving into greater disruption. Technology doesn't stop for anybody. Technology doesn't believe in anybody. Technology is rebellious. The moment you create a structure, there is technology that wants to drop it. There's technology that wants to destroy it. Even AI, as much as we develop AI, the one thing we haven't learned with AI right now is things that really drive human beings. AI cannot have hope. AI cannot dream. AI cannot fear. But ultimately, we as human beings, we hope, we fear, and we drive things in a way that is beyond the logic, beyond reason. There is no reasonableness to the way we dream. There is no reasonableness to that. So how does technology move in a direction that it responds to what actually makes us as human, what actually drives us, what actually makes us strive and want to go and explore? There's nothing in AI that tells me that I want to go explore the universe. When I was a kid, I used to keep staring at the universe and wondering, my God, Milky Way, what lies beyond that? What lies beyond that? And struggled with the idea of infinity. Technology does not struggle that way that I did as a child. So what am I really trying to get at? I'm trying to understand that one of the things that we are, as Alexander, you said, that we are tribal. We're tribal people. And honestly, the parliament is nothing but a huge tribe. It's tribalism. Let's look at politics anyway. Let's look at Trump. Why did Trump win? He provoked a sense of tribalism in the American people, whereas Hillary Clinton was provoking a sense of reasonableness. I know how to run this country. He was provoking tribalism. So one of the great things about people who provoke tribalism, and good people and bad people, even Gandhi provoked tribalism, Mandela provoked tribalism, Hitler provoked tribalism by becoming mythic in their own lives. What do you mean by they became mythic in their own lives? They became mythic in their own lives by understanding what is the psychology and what is the need of that moment. Gandhi could not have become Gandhi if the British didn't rule India. He had an enemy. So tribalism always comes often. Mandela had apartheid. Hitler, imagine, because Germany was in such turmoil, he picked an enemy. He picked the Jewish people. Trump picked an enemy. Trump is now picking up China to make sure that he wins the election. He can try. So we are tribal people. And now we talk about big data. You know that policeman, I'm not saying big data isn't great, but big data, even Amazon will interpret big data. The human mind does not understand data. The human mind understands a story. I'm a storyteller. If I churn out data, everybody's going to walk out of the theater. I have to tell a story. Even in a film, I'm using big data. Even the policeman that is running after a black kid at night in New York is responding to the big data, or the data in his mind which says, okay, he's black, he's a teenager, it's night, he's running, and he probably killed somebody, I need to shoot him. He's interpreting the data in his mind. However high and however big we get AI, there'll always be an interpretation. There'll always be that. So in that context, a constant change, greater technology. Just to say right now, as you were talking, Alexander, I was thinking, in our imagination as filmmakers, we said 800 million cell phones in India in such a short period of time. And we have the coronavirus, and currently huge numbers of people are walking home, struggling to get home. They're dying on the way. Now there's a cyclone coming, and people are now about to get killed on the way home by cyclone. Delhi yesterday had a hailstorm. People were getting cold, and there are people wearing nothing trying to get home. I'm not being a socialist, I'm not being a communist, I'm not doing politics. What I'm saying, here's a country that is the second biggest user of Facebook. It's one of the biggest users of WhatsApp. It's one of the biggest number of cell phone connections, and has a huge amount of big data there. But in the tribalism, there's a constant churn, there's a constant change, and a lot of that change is conflicting. It conflicts constantly. Right now, our politics are conflicting because of change. So Nishith knows that the amount of times I've given a lecture on technology and smoothened it out and saying the great new world is coming. The great new world of technology is coming. It is. Of course it is. But what the current, the virus is teaching us is this great new world has a greater propensity to fracture. And the greater propensity to fracture actually comes from our sense of tribalism. It's inherent in us. And Alexander, you said it too. And I've often wondered why we're tribal. But I've always often wondered why, when we as human beings see a beautiful piece of land, and it doesn't take very long for us to draw white lines in that beautiful piece of nature and call it real estate. What is it? What is it? Is it so fundamental? So are the fundamental instincts of us as human beings going to become more general? Are we going to become a more compassionate and more peaceful society? Is the coronavirus going to teach us that? Or is it what's happening right now in the coronavirus? Fear is the more afraid we get, the more tribal we get. So is the future world, is AI, is it going to put us into a world where we all understand and fear less? Or is that even fearing less? Is that 1984, the great novel that says we're only fearing less because we're not thinking enough and because AI is thinking for us? So right now, the very confident guy that's constantly saying AI technology. I mean, I'm looking at how to tell stories in artificial intelligence. Can artificial intelligence write a book? You talked about the press. How fantastic. We can all publish and we can get onto the internet and relate to each other. As long as we don't relate to each other, opposing factions, and create fear in each other. You know, we have a big tale in India, the Mahabharata. Huge. The Mahabharata is India's greatest story. And the Mahabharata used to be told. There were probably 1 million versions of Mahabharata. Still, somebody decided that we now have the ability to use the press to publish it. And when it was published, there became one version of Mahabharata, or two, or maybe three. And yet, there were at that time 1 million passed down by people speaking and talking and talking and reinterpreting and reinterpreting. Is that reinterpretation a way, if you're using this great thing, a kind of a pressure cooker that is constantly getting released in societies as they keep retelling their stories and adapting? Or is what technology is going to do us, what it's going to do to us is stop us from reinterpreting every day. I actually have great faith in technology because of its disruption, because it won't allow structures anymore, because it will bring down Amazon, because somewhere there'll be rebellious people saying, let's bring down Amazon, and we can bring it down. You know, the way recording companies were brought down, the way big corporations were brought down. Any gatekeeper that becomes a gatekeeper, there are people sitting there waiting for it, waiting to break it down. I am not actually, Alexander, you so provoked me into thinking, and right now I'm thinking aloud. There are things that you've said to me, so I'm going to leave it there. I have 1 million other thoughts that I'd like to speak about, yet I'd like to give other people a chance and come back to you. And Alexander, I love what you just said, and it's a great conversation that we have to go on, because we all look for a fairer society, a more just society, where everybody has an equal share. Well, you know, in a world where 5% of the people actually own 85% of the resources of this planet, it's not fair. There's a great push coming maybe everywhere. Okay, thank you.
Shekhar, for your comments and very thoughtful and very much reflective from the standpoint of where Alexander left us. What I thought we will do is that I'm going to first invite Tim and Nishith if they have anything to respond to both these presentations. and then I might have a few questions and comments. And I hope the viewers are able to send their questions to the chat box, and we can take them as well. So Tim, over to you.
That was really interesting. It got me thinking. One of the bases of power that wasn't mentioned, Alexander didn't mention, is the media. You talked about symbolic and the narrative, and the narrative is often controlled by the media, and a lot of people just follow the media blindly. They just give a piece of their own brain to the media, and they just parrot whatever that media tells them. And I think that that's a fear response. The media likes to sell fear. They like to advertise fear. They sell advertisement by creating fearful stories, and it sets off that part of your brain that's fight or flight, and it's an addiction for a lot of people. And I think that is one of the things that I think we need to resist. I love the idea of shared data, but I think that we need individual thought. I also think that a free market creates a great opportunity for people, and that's where Shekhar and I don't agree. And that is where he says somebody's got to take down Amazon. I think that's a huge mistake. Amazon is a fabulous company with billions of happy customers. I think entrepreneurs can provide a better service and slowly do a better job than Amazon does, and then the market forces will lead to a new great service that does a better job, or multiple great services that do a better job, or even a different job. I mean, people might want a different form of delivery of their product or whatever. I think that I see two worlds. One is the dystopian world, one's the utopian world. And COVID has sort of gotten us to think for ourselves and saying, well, which way is this world going to go? And I think the fear world is the dystopian world. That's the world of former tribalism. That's the world of groupthink media. It's the world that where we all kind of go in the same way and we walk right off a cliff. I mean, what if the media is wrong? Heaven forbid they were wrong about COVID and we crashed the economy for no reason. How about and now on the utopian side, we got a world of opportunity. We have this extraordinary race, the human race, that has innovated in so many different ways. And there have been so many things that have come from free markets, from democracies, from this new way of thinking about the customer and providing that service. That world, the opportunity world, is a global world. It's not tribal, it's open and transparent, and we all share in this great global world. And that's where we share the data, and then we can think for ourselves, and we don't have to have the media determine what our values are and our systems are. And I think Alexander said something like this: the idea that you would be free to think for yourself, free to speak for yourself, but then also be free to vote for a way that the world might want to go. Now, that vote could be for a family, or for a township, or for a city, or for a bigger form of government, or for the world. But the part that scares me the most there is when I say for the world, because if somehow a democracy for the world decides that we all should be jumping off a cliff, then we're all going to jump off the cliff. And so I think those people who have this, what kind of power did you call it? The imagery power, should be very, very careful. And something I really you know, I'm not crazy about the politicians on either side of our fence, but one thing I've got to say that Trump did well was in the COVID crisis, he took it to a certain point, and then he said, okay, now let's let the states decide. And the smart states said, okay, let's have the counties decide, and then let's have the cities decide, and let's have the townships decide. If you have the decision for the whole world, that's a big decision. If you're able to push that decision down to a smaller and local level, that becomes a smaller decision and doesn't like destroy humanity with one big well poop. And I like the idea of fairness and justness and equality. I'm not sure about an equal share. I think somebody who works harder should earn more. And I think that is a human motivation. It drives humanity. It creates a search to go to Mars. It creates these people who work their science to figure out that we may have global warming. It's the thing that drives, and whether that's money or influence or following or whatever it is, that drive is very important, and a free market for that drive helps humanity move forward in a super fast way. So, and I think one definition, Shekhar's definition of fair and just may be different from my definition of fair and just. And I feel that those kinds of things should not I don't want one central force deciding how the entire world operates. I like the idea that governments compete for us, that they have to provide a good service that we like so that we can raise our kids in a place where they've got good education, or we can go live in a place where we know that the environment is going to be great, or we can go to a place where they have the best medical resources, or the place that has the lowest taxes for the best services. I think that governments are starting to recognize, you know, I've been pushing this idea of competitive governance for a long time, where people are customers and they can decide which government they want to participate in. All of a sudden with COVID, some of the biggest searches on the planet today are, what if I live in another place? And they're happening because all these people are stuck in cities, right? And they're going, oh my God, what if I have to wear a mask the rest of my life? And a lot of them kind of like escaped Saudi Arabia in order to not wear a mask the rest of their lives. And they're looking and they're going, whoa, I don't want to wear a mask the rest of my life. And now that the Saudis are taking their masks off, the rest of us now have to wear them. It's people are saying, where can I go where my kids and their kids and their kids and their kids can live a free and open and a wonderful life? And so that's, I think, where we're going. I think we need ongoing competition. We need governments to be accountable to the people, or give people the option to go to another country, or to be provided services by other countries. Those services can be provided by the country that holds their physical landmass, or by a country that doesn't. They could be a country that started that's 11 miles offshore or up in space or whatever. A country can provide many government services. Most government services are virtual. It's mostly tied to insurance. It's healthcare and healthcare insurance and pension insurance and workman's comp insurance and employment insurance. That's a big part of what government does. Well, that can be provided with Bitcoin, the blockchain, smart contracts, artificial intelligence, and some surveillance. And all of a sudden you've got a country that doesn't have all the overhead, doesn't have all the politics, doesn't have all the you know, the expenses that these other countries have. I mean, the U.S. used to spend, well, first they used to spend $0 in governing because it was we the people. Well, now, I mean, and then it was like 100 years ago, it was 8% of the GDP was government. And then it just has been on this slow, steady increase to where now it's 50% of the GDP is spent by government. It's in effect, instead of being spent by a guy like Bezos who has earned it, it's being spent by people who won popularity contests. But even then, I feel like they kind of earned that position. And I like that there is competition for those positions. And as long as you've got competition, I think you're going to have a fair world. It will be, you need the freedom to compete. You need the freedom to have your governments provide fair services or get either voted out or have the people be able to vote with their feet and move out. I know California's taxes are the highest in the country. People are moving out of California at an extraordinarily fast rate. Jobs are leaving California. And now California is begging for money from the federal government. Well, look, if you didn't misspend it, you wouldn't be out of money. If you encouraged competition, if you would encourage businesses to do things, you would have plenty of money to provide good services to your people. If you created an atmosphere where people would come and they'd say, oh, I can experiment, I can try a new business without being slapped down by the SEC, the FCC, the FDA, the whatever. I mean, it's tougher and tougher to be a small business in America. So people are starting to look outside, and America is losing its edge against the rest of the world in that way. So you're seeing entrepreneurship flourish everywhere, and that's a healthy sign. I've noticed Europe has started to open up more, and way to go, Alexander. I don't know what you did, but good job with Sweden. You guys fought the virus without destroying your economy. I think that this competition amongst governments is going to be is going to continue, and it's going to be healthy. And I'm hoping that, as you say, there are more governments that come out of it rather than consolidating governments, because when they all consolidate, then we can all walk off the cliff together.
Thank you.
This
Thank
is
you.
Shekhar. Can I just say something?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Shekhar.
Well,
Yes, Shekhar.
Tim, I didn't mean that Tim, I did not mean that Amazon is going to be brought down by some revolution. I was saying that technology is changing so fast and is so aggressive that when structures form, and in the future when structures form and become huge, they're vulnerable to smaller technologies because huge structures tend to retain themselves, like governments do also, and become defensive. I'm already watching technologies, even like, say, 3D printing to 4G printing. What is it? I mean, people will want, they can print things at home. That's just one technology. So what I'm saying is Amazon, not because of Bezos, or not because they're providing great service, but because newer technologies will change the way it's all done. And Amazon, because it's so huge, will start to defend itself. And the constant change that we are seeing now, the churn in technology and churn in change, will make it very difficult for large-scale organizations to survive. That's what I was saying, not that they're not doing a great job.
Well, it's interesting. I come at it from the small business point of view, and we are trying to challenge Amazon at all times. We're challenging Amazon and Microsoft and Google, and we're challenging image of humanity that doesn't exist yet. We're trying to create new forms of government. We're trying to create new forms of banking system and all that. And that's exciting, but at the same time, there are certain countries that are trying to quash technology, and by doing that, they are hurting themselves and their people. And fortunately, we have lots of countries so that when China says Bitcoin's illegal, Japan says Bitcoin's a national currency, and those entrepreneurs have a place to go. If all the countries sort of band together and destroy technology, then Amazon gets to keep their place in the sun forever because no one will ever come up with anything new because it won't be legal. I think we've just got to make sure that these governments are always in competition with each other, that they're providing great service for the taxes that they provide, and that they are creating platforms from which innovation and technologies can thrive. So new technologies can keep thriving and humanity will keep progressing forward.
Can I just add there, Tim? Because you just put, I think we agree strongly on that all kinds of systems are better off if they're decentralized, distributed, and competitive. I mean, this goes for democracy, this goes for markets, this goes for cultures, this goes for our ability to move anywhere in the world. I think migration is a fantastic thing. My team here in Stockholm are following Indians in exile, Chinese people in exile, Iranians in exile, and Nigerians in exile. And it turns out these 4 different ethnic categories are the most prosperous people on the planet. When people move, they move because they are actually innovative. So innovation is tied to this idea I have of the free and open algorithm. And if you look, for example, at communist China and say compare it to its neighbors, even little Taiwan with 24 million people is way more innovative than all of communist China with 1.4 billion people. And the reason for that is that if you run a monopoly of any kind, all you can do at best is temporarily just mimic. You will find somebody else to mimic. It will be America or maybe India or somewhere else. And then you mimic what they do. And you can do that very efficiently within a monopolistic structure, at least for a while. But sooner or later, you're going to come to the point that, wait a second, somebody's going to come up with a new idea called an innovation, right? And innovations can never occur in systems that aren't first distributed and decentralized and competitive. So we are looking at some shared values here that I think we can go global with. We can find people in Japan, in India, in Europe, and North America. And we learned from history that if you keep these systems distributed, decentralized, and open, it will be all for the better. So this, I think, for Nishith's concern with democracy as well, is absolute key. And this ties into when you mentioned media before, Tim, because the democratization of media is exactly what the internet has provided. The democratization is that, well, the old power structures are upset with us because we no longer just read the morning newspaper any longer. We still maybe do online, but then we read 5 other news sources or 10 other news sources. And yeah, some of them are absolutely freakish and weird, and they're astrology columns or whatever you call it. But, you know, at the end of the day, it is exactly, again, the distribution, wide distribution of the data that makes it possible for us to actually find our way around. Like my father told me when I was a kid, read 5 newspapers in the morning, then make up your own mind. You're going to be a smart kid. That is so fundamentally, globally true to me today, right? Go out and find different news sources. And I tell the kids to come up and ask me, the students say, how am I going to be a winner online? Oh, find antagonists. Find people who fight with you. Find people who disagree with you. Invite them to a network. Get out of the damn echo chambers. Get out of these sort of completely tribal structures where everybody thinks alike, because you're not going to grow in an environment you're not being challenged. So I think this is key. And one more thing. Of course, I said I'm a philosopher of human beings in relationship to technology. I might come across as a technology-only philosopher. That's blatantly untrue. As a philosopher, I work with human beings all day long, and now more than ever. Because I think the really big question we could start to ask ourselves, and this is kind of an utopian idea to play with, is that if the machine comes along in a sort of massive sense that it does what machines can do really well, which is only logos, by the way. I can assure Shekhar that pathos cannot be ever done by machines. Machines cannot even crack jokes. They won't be able to smell coffee for the next 100 years. Don't worry. The tons of stuff the machines will never be able to do that only humans can do. But to find what the machines are going, think of it as the machine asking us, so you're humans, and there's 8 billion of you. What do you guys do? Who are you? What are you up to? That is a more important question than ever to answer, so that we know what the machines will do better than us, but we'll also know what to keep under our power because we do that better. To me, that is the old struggle between the logos and the pathos. And the only way for the logos and the pathos, even in your own brain, one half is logos, one half is pathos. And the only way for you to have some kind of coherent sense of self is to try to unify the logos and the pathos, at least occasionally. And that's what's called mythos. And this story is the one we need to retell ourselves about what it means to be human. That story now also has to be the human and the machine from now on, I think.
Thank you very much, Alexander.
I just want to say something here. Yeah, do you remember the way Napster brought down the gatekeepers of the music business? And since then, the music business and the indie music business is far more alive, far more exciting, and the people that consume it find it wonderful. So it's in that sense that new technologies and rebelliousness together form together, and as new technologies keep coming up, and that combined with the kind of rebelliousness we just talked about, Alexander, that'll make sure that structures are constantly on the brink of falling down because of new technology.
Thank you, Shekhar, for that comment. Nishith, would you like to add something before I ask some questions?
I think I was enjoying the fun of different ideas, and I've spoken enough last time, but a few points here. I think there were references to equality, and I would use word equity. I think world needs to be a little more equitable rather than equal. It will never be equal, and of course there'll be different people. Even if you give the same amount of money to 100 people, in 1 year's time, each one would have created different value out of it, and some would have destroyed as well. So I think in many ways, what Tim said, or otherwise, one can be smart, one can be agile, one can use it more effectively and stuff like that. But each one has its own nuances. Somebody may not make money, but can create more satisfaction out of the money. So each one has his own way of valuing money as well. And so I think, but at the same time, all that I say is that, that on the broader plane, there must be some kind of equity so people have an ability to live reasonably comfortably. And then beyond that, you compete, you do whatever you want to do, so that you do not see complete distortion of the human lives. Number two, I think Alexander spoke about immigration, and my view on immigration is worst form of protectionism and against human rights. I think everyone has a right to move to, and to be a prosper is also human rights today. And all this theory of state certainly doesn't excite me. And some point in time that will come under a cloud, and we'll see in next 50, 70, 100 years, a lot of things changing. I actually learned about netocracy from Alexander's book, which my son Suril gave me about 8, 9 years ago. And it excited me. I think it was very good. So now I'm learning sensocracy. Everything is by senses. So, all these new things that are coming up are overwhelming to a small lawyer like me. And, it's very interesting that, everything has its own advantages. When it goes to the extreme and becomes abusive, that is where the beginning of the fall happens. So by and large, when somebody has become powerful, but it has not used power in a responsible manner, then I think somewhere along the line, it remains, monopoly is the same situation. Somebody, if he cannot fight physically, he cannot fight through politics, he becomes innovative and creates new technology. Even governments, when they become too powerful and they try to, abuse the power, or again, technology comes its way and changes the thing, because you cannot control technology. I'm sure, I think team is introduced us to unstoppable. I think you cannot take down and stuff like that. So things are on. We are going to hear all those kind of things on Wednesday. So it's very interesting to see how technology cannot be controlled, and sometimes we try to control those things which are not controllable, and we are not controlling things that we need to control, which is the greed and the, kind of stuff that we may talk about. So, again, I'm not being judgmental here. And it's very important that somewhere on the line, we need to find a balance. Again, as I say, the biggest fear of data and information is this, that once that is compromised, it goes into the, I would not say wrong hands, but we go right hand, but it is abuse. As I was mentioning last time, one of the concerns that I would have is this automated weapons. So in the future, if the automated weapon comes and I could have bullets with your name and my name written on it, and it can do surgical strike on a particular individual, and it just goes on its own, doesn't need human intervention. So when we go into those, we just need to see where do we put limits. So sometimes you call, what is the limit to growth? So when we say growth, doesn't mean that you limit your growth, but it is not physical boundary I'm talking about. I'm talking about the intellectual boundary. As to there are few things where we need to be a little careful, so it is not abused, it doesn't become destructive for the world. And of course, today's session, we had two subjects. One, Parliament in the Cloud. I think that is second backseat because last time we discussed about it. And I think that as we move along, I think the whole concept of democracy, which we talked about, and on I think in coming days we'll be discussing more on liquid democracy and stuff like that. Now, if we think that how do you wade your way through into the new model of democracy? There are a number of ideas that are coming up, and representative democracy, direct democracy, but there is time has come to rethink about it. If we together sit down and discuss, we'll be able to find some new solutions, but new solutions will be definitely driven by technology. So if we want to move towards liquid democracy or somewhere hybrid in between direct and indirect, all that we are talking about, put power back into the hands of the people, you know, put power back into the hands of the people. And, yeah, as soon as you lose the trust of the people, I think you know right to continue. And those are the kind of things we would be discussing. Obviously, it's over 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock now. And maybe we should either have some questions or maybe Raj could have some, but as I was mentioning that even Parliament, um, um, e- even legislations can, first of all, what kind of legislation should go into the Parliament for bill, right? Big data can prioritize what are the real needs of the people rather than some member of parliament or otherwise, because that is perception based, here is reality based. And then it can introduce itself as a law. And can law be written by AI? Can law be written by crowdsourcing? We discussed all those points last time, including, as I was mentioning, the Wikipedia is something 140,000 editors. Okay, unbelievable. Okay, there is a book called The Road, which has been written by artificial intelligence. Fiction is written by artificial intelligence. So a lot of interesting things are happening. And I got a mail from one of the media lawyers in Los Angeles last week that now even the films are being produced by artificial intelligence. So, some of those new things make us believe that even the legislation can also be in many ways automated. It would be crowdsourced, so people's views are incorporated into that, and we can have a better world to live. I think that is what all we are aspiring for. So whatever we can do, I think that is where we should be focusing on. New model of democracy that is now required after 1100 years of representative democracy or 2000 years of direct democracy. I think we have very interesting time ahead of us. It may take 10, 20 years. These days, it doesn't even long time. Amazon, 20, how many team? It must be for 20 years now, 20, 22 years. Idea came at that point of time when somebody told me, oh, there's going to be shopping mall in sky. I think it is esoteric. And how did people pay billions of dollars for one.com and, whole thing happened? It was imaginary. It was imaginary, but some people believed in it, some people did not. Those who believed, they paid extraordinary dollars for those kind of things, you know, and they took big risk. Okay, and of course they gained out of it as well. Same way, and within 20 years, now we see that it's a reality. Instead of shopping malls, you go to Amazon. Okay, same way somebody else will come with something else in next few years. You don't know. And in technology world, I think lots of companies that come, they also go away and wither away very soon. Okay, so same way, I think Parliament in the sky is not something that is undoable or unthinkable. netocracy, or what you call censorship, or the new models of democracy. It may not take too long a time, just as Amazon didn't take too long time. It can be 20, 30 years, not 100 years perhaps. I think within our lifetime we can see some change happening. But I think it's a good time for philosophers, scientists, entrepreneurs, directors like Shekhar, and all those people to come together and re-envision a new way of doing things. If we not do it, then it will come in unorganized form. So I think if we have an opportunity to shape the world that we want. That's what
Thank you.
I want to
Thank you,
think.
Nishith. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
your comments.
Oh, you can go on
Alexander,
and on, but thank you for the opportunity.
it's a pleasure, Nishith. Alexander and Shekhar, I have a couple of questions. So let me first start with Alexander. Alexander, one of the things that has happened in the history of this evolution, including the role of parliament and governmental institutions, is that we did predict at some point of time that globalization will reimagine the relationship between the state and the citizen. And then it took an entire global economic crisis, including in the US, the subprime mortgage crisis, which led to reimagination of the role of the private sector, including government. And the government struck back in a big way and expanded its powers. Today, we have a situation where you have a global pandemic, and technology has indeed enabled us to do many things, but governments around the world are today also appropriating and using technology to exercise even greater power over people. So my question to you is that, are we in a situation where we will play catching up?
I think we are in a very, very, very important situation. Censorship was modeled originally by the Chinese Communist Party. We should understand that the idea that there's censorship absolutely everywhere is a fantasy of totalitarian guys from Plato even onwards, right? Throughout history, we're going to trace in the new book. Where does authoritarianism and totalitarianism, where do they come from? Where do the ideas come from? What do they do when they gain power? Well, they usually don't last too long, but they cause enormous havoc and destruction when they access power. So we want to avoid that because we want to keep the systems open, free, decentralized, distributed, because we know that over the long periods of time, that creates bigger value. And it's also the morally right thing to do. So, but I think right now, because, when the pandemic strikes and media goes after everybody, just like, and the paranoia is spread wildly, even after September 11, America was like put into shock, way too much paranoia. And over the next 10 years, they created the security industry in America that was completely unwarranted. There was nothing at all in relation to what actually happened on September 11. It's just that September 11 was so grisly. The image that was distributed by media was this was such an awful thing, which of course it was. But the response to it had no relationship at all to what actually had happened. And the risk here with the pandemic is being used for people around the world, for people who are currently in power. Certainly in Europe, we see with Putin in Russia, we see with Erdogan in Turkey. They're scared of falling out of power because they might be blamed for the pandemic that is hitting these countries really badly at the moment. And they should be held responsible because they were leaders and they weren't prepared. But they will try to get their way out of it by responding with police state rhetoric and possibly police state mechanisms. And the problem historically is that once we started doing these things, once we've introduced the police state, it's very hard to unwind it and get out of it. It's very tempting for politicians and other power brokers to actually keep the concentration of power that they managed to accumulate. So we need to watch out very carefully. I think this is also the perfect moment to start the movement for a free and open algorithm. And referring to what Nishith said before, is that this is what we mean with the word netocrats. Netocrats are people who are winners using the internet. These are the online winners. These are the entrepreneurs, the artists, the symbolic powers, the narratives, all the guys out there using the internet, their events. Every YouTuber is an netocrat. So we put our hopes to them by telling them, you need to fight for free and open internet because you already benefited richly from it. Then you must understand that we also need a free and open society where we live. The rest to me is politics of scale. It's all about where do you make the decision, on which scale. And then it is, what can machines do better than us, and what do we do best as human beings? That to me is a secondary question. I think the number one question today, how do we avoid turning this situation into a police state and instead using the unique opportunity to take a free and open internet to make that a free and open world altogether?
Okay, so I'd like to say that I'd like to give my liquid democracy vote to Alexander so that he can speak for me wherever he goes, because I believe the exact same thing. This is terrifying me that all of a sudden we're going to have police states. They're forcing people, they're arresting people for not wearing masks. This is the worst thing that has ever happened to the land of the free and the home of the brave, ever. And I only thought it was, I thought that world was only there for socialist Russia and now back for communist China. I didn't realize it was going to permeate America too. But boy, we need our freedom back, and we need it back quickly. And fortunately, I'm seeing that people are saying, hey, we're all getting back to work. You know, we're doing our best to do, at least paying lip service to social distancing or whatever. I think we do have a major opportunity right now to open the borders, to have a decentralized world, we have a big opportunity now. But boy, it's a small group of people that need to spread the message. And there are a lot of people who have given their brain away to the media. And so we need to get our small group of people to permeate the media and make sure the media knows that this is going to be a better way for all of us to live.
Thank you very much.
Anyway, you have my liquid democracy vote, Alexander.
Thank you so much, Tim. Shekhar, I have a question for you. Shekhar, over 30 years ago, in 1988, Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky wrote a book entitled Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of the Mass Media. And the authors talked about a number of things, but one of the things, and I will quote that, they said, and speaking about US, they said that communication media of the US are effective and powerful ideological institutions that carry out a system-supportive propaganda function by reliance on market forces, internalized assumptions, self-censorship, and without overt coercion, unquote. My question to you is, do you see this in the last 30 years becoming a global phenomenon, and technology has aided and abetted this expansion?
That was such a long sentence that I'm not quite getting my hands around it. But anyway, my mind. I think what the question is, I'll guess at it. I think first, let's all accept that technology is a brilliant thing. I mean, right from the time that my little daughter, when she was 4 years old, I gave her a piece of crayon, that was her technology. We've all survived in technology. Cave paintings, the piece of stone drawing on the caves was a piece of technology. Where would human beings be? That's what separates us. That's what makes us individualistic. That's what gives us a sense of exploration, and that's why we are where we are in so many ways, because of technology. If the question then is, in the world of the internet, and in this world of technology that's given us the internet, is that given us a way to constantly conflict with each other? Yeah, I think so. I think that one of the things that the internet has done is it's not allowed in a good way. I always believed in the wisdom of the crowd. I'm more and more seeing that I was potentially wrong, because the wisdom of the crowd is becoming more and more contentious. And if you talk about governments and technology and the internet against the governments are as effective. They have the most powerful machines to use technology on the internet to influence people. So what we call the technology of influence, or influence through technology and through the internet, I'm not sure right now that we are in a state where the influencers, who are these influencers, who influences the influencers, What power do the influences have? Which way they will go? Are they fooling us? There's this whole idea that we are still coming to terms with. But the answer is that there is no other way. There is absolutely no other way except this conflict. This conflict will go on forever. And hopefully, in somewhere in this conflict, we'll discover the way to learn to live with each other and we'll come to solutions. But we have been coming to solutions. It's not all dark, but it is confusing. It is conflicting. It is constantly conflicting.
Thank you, Shekhar. Thank you, Shekhar, for that.
The question.
You did. Alexander, I just wanted to bring this discussion to you, but also to talk to you a little bit about, you see, in one of the fault lines in democracies that we see is that whenever crises happen, governments tend to think that they have the answer. And there is a natural sense of recognition among people that the governments will have the answer. This extraordinary sense of legitimacy and credibility of both democracies on the one hand.
Well, they're both good news and bad news here. The first good news is that the whole idea you can manufacture consent is now a dead idea. Otherwise, Hillary Clinton would have won at least 2 American elections by now, because he used the old strategy that mass media had become very efficient. After newspapers, you had radio, you had eventually had television, and with radio and television and commercials and everything, you could control the consent or you could control the crowd. And the internet killed that. Barack Obama beat her in 2008 and became the president because he was actually the first internet president. And then ironically, Donald Trump used the same tricks 8 years later and won his presidency because he was also an internet president. He was driven by the online world against mass media and against academics and against the old power structures. So we already passed the possibility of manufacturing consent. Now, I'd like to point out that I also believe in the wisdom of crowds, but what we've seen over the past 10 years has been more like the stupidity of the echo chamber. And the stupidity of the echo chamber means that it's a very natural first reaction when you suddenly have this new media available to you and you're asked about your opinion at all times. And it's like somebody's giving you a megaphone and you're supposed to use it. And you put the likes everywhere and you try to follow the people you like, and you become a fan to somebody that you follow, and you follow them. And suddenly, all of a sudden, we have these echo chambers that most of these Facebook forums became, that we're now turning our backs on. Because it turned out that being stuck in an echo chamber with people who agreed with you at all times only meant you were finding somebody out there, an abject you could hate. And the only thing that united you within the echo chamber was that you hated this one person or this other echo chamber. So we were stuck in our echo chamber, and the other echo chamber was out there. We were throwing things at them all the time, and it was just repeating the same stuff. It's just like, yeah, we accuse you of this, we accuse you of this, and we accuse you of this again and again, and we have nothing else to say. Now, that was the stupidity of the echo chamber, and thank God the 2010s are over. And young people today are discovering that I don't become very smart. I don't become a netocrat by being stuck inside an echo chamber where I just repeat the same bullshit all the time. And that's when you discover that, oh, I need antagonism. I need people to challenge me. Oh, suddenly you discover that, wait a second, we need to go back in history and find the trade routes and you know, the harbors of the world and these places where people of different cultures met, who came from completely different backgrounds, hardly spoke the same language, but had to agree on both principles and certain other things. This is what the wisdom of crowds is. The wisdom of crowd is a crowd that's been thrown together with many different archetypes, personality types, backgrounds, and because it has variety from the beginning, it can be wise. There's enormous difference between these things, but I think people are also maturing. We are learning as we go along because you're all online these days. So even if we're caught unprepared when the corona pandemic happened, and I got very sick early March, but I discovered after a week after going through my COVID-19 that, dear, my God, there were like tens of thousands of men out there around the world who, like me, were stuck with the pandemic. In the pandemic themselves, they got sick, but we all helped each other out. We learned, like every hour you could go online and find thousands of men of my age going through the same experience who tipped each other about what do you do next and what are you supposed to eat and what is the latest news and what this could be. So it was like a massive parallel study, medical study, was spontaneously going on between the amateurs who were affected by the disease. We've never seen phenomena like this before in history. This is the beauty of the internet. This is the enormous capacity for us to connect instantly with people who make us wise, but not with people who make us stupid. This is what we need to teach the kids today. We need to teach the kids the difference between wisdom and stupidity, and how actually challenging yourself at all times is going to make you a smart netocrat, not the opposite.
Thank you so much, Alexander. We are coming close to the end of this program. I have a question for Shekhar. Shekhar, India is, of course, while a large country, but also has some 850 million people within the age group of less than 35 years. We are an old civilization, but a young country. The young people of India, like many other young people, are ready to challenge and resist authority in any form. And they are prepared to even question and challenge government thinking when it comes to use of technology, which can potentially even undermine civil liberties as well as the right to privacy. So in this context, what should be the framework for determining the relationship between technology as well as citizens?
Let me challenge something that you're saying, that the young people in India are ready to challenge. Remember that most of them, all of them, we were left with a very colonial education system that taught us that the worst thing that you can do is challenge authority. We're still suffering from that. And that's because they wanted a whole nation of babus. They did not want a nation of entrepreneurs. They wanted a nation of, that's why India is so full. And with all its talent, India is still a backroom, a back support system country. We don't really create our own IP. So there's a long way to go for us to be mature challengers, absolute mature challengers and mature innovators. Whether it's innovators in thought, there are thought leaders, there is innovation. But we need it when the real mass challenges. Right now, all challenge is channeled into hate, because the society gets fearful, it doesn't really understand how to challenge, or they're not encouraged to go in and really analyze it, or Alexander has go back to history and come back, and then it's just all hate. So we need to go much further. This young youth population needs to go much further and needs to be educated right from the classroom onwards.
Thank you so much, Shekhar. Alexander, would you like to add anything to what Shekhar said?
I just want to say that today is May 18, 2020, and I'd like to stress that 15 democratic activists in Hong Kong were put on trial today by the Chinese Communist Party and their lackeys in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong, for me right now, is one of the most important addresses in the world. It's a city-state, it's prosperous, it's been turned into police state during the pandemic, and the Chinese Communist Party are trying to regain control and use the current circumstances to fight democracy and fight the free and open society. And I think it's very important. We might have lost Hong Kong 3 months from now, but the overall struggle in India, in North America, here in Europe where I live, is all about the struggle for the free, open algorithm, so that we can have a free, open society, so we can stay innovative, experimental, and be open to love the stranger. At the end of the day, we need to save the planet and love the stranger, the two most important aspects. And I'd like to stress one thing here. The fact that Hong Kong is now this place where the police state has been introduced, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to regain control and basically force a dictatorship onto the citizens of Hong Kong, although they desperately want a free and open democracy. The fact that it's happening right now, I'd like to point out that I've also prophesized that America will remain a major narrative superpower, and India will be one of the major narrative superpowers of the 21st century. I think India will be a massive global storyteller of its own evolution, where India's side is going, that people around the world will relate to, and because the English language is now basically taken over by the Indians from the Americans. India, to me, is a cultural superpower going ahead, and I can't see China as a cultural superpower if it's going towards this dictatorship, because I think it's precisely the world is already free and open, that wants its own culture free and open, and it's culturally the pathic narrative that we embrace a free and open society, and only a free and open person can tell us a story that engages us. Thank God the dictators cannot tell us anything else but the most boring stories in the world. And I think that ultimately is where this struggle will be solved. The winner of the struggle between dictatorship and the free and open side will be that the free and open people are much better at creating a narrative that humans want to hear.
Thank you, Alexander. That was a fantastic way to kind of move into our concluding set of remarks. I would like to now call upon both Nishith and Tim to say anything they have to say in this as we end this program. Nishith?
No, I think we are almost reaching 10:30. People will be getting impatient. Though I have a lot of interesting questions to ask. And but only other thing I would have loved to hear from Tim was something on the referendum he worked on in California. And it was a good experiment, and I think it must have taught him some lessons. So if we have 1 or 2 minutes from him, and if he wants to share, because first time when you do, you always have some issues. But I think just want to understand in couple of minutes because we are almost running out of time.
Say something in response to Alexander. I think
Shekhar, please.
Alexander, what he said was absolutely correct. But remember that we are a very young society. It's a very young population. But we are in India a society in absolute flux. And because we are so disparate, let's look at Bollywood, for example. The Indian film industry makes films in 22 languages. And each language has its own separate identity. Each culture has its own separate identity. So we are like the whole European nations in one nation. So it will take us this time to get to that maturity. I've also always believed that the Indian youth is like a jack in the box. And once they get out and speak in one voice, they will bring a cultural change to the rest of the world because our storytelling is completely different. Our storytelling is much more circular. The Western way of storytelling is much more linear, and it seems to have an end. But in Eastern philosophies and the way we tell our stories, we don't end it. We go around in circles. And there's not necessarily a solution, but there's always a step forward. Where in the West, they're always looking for a solution that brings it to an end. We're always looking for the next step, and the next step. So yes, and then I think once we mature as a society, everything that you prophesied about India is going to come true. And I hope it does.
Thank you so much, Shekhar, for those wonderful closing remarks. I want to really say thank you to Alexander and Shekhar for a fascinating set of remarks. I'm sure everybody who listened to this were deeply enlightened. In some ways, many aspects of the theme that we were discussing for the last previous session, but also what we intend to discuss the next few days has been discussed as a part of this effort. We have a number of distinguished speakers lined up for the next several days. As I mentioned, we have Dr. Shashi Tharoor, as well as Mr. Nalin Kohli from the BJP party. We also have Mr. Ashok Kumar, Director, Black Oak LLC, Singapore, and followed by Mr. Vikas Chowdhury, President at Reliance Jio. So we have these individuals joining us as well. So I want to thank all of you for joining us in today's session. And as it was mentioned before, the theme of reinventing democracy and discussing about the future of Parliament has come at an extraordinary time when many of these institutions and their functioning has been challenged. And this discussion, provoked and promoted by Nishith Desai Associates in partnership with a few other organizations, has come at a most opportune time. And I would like to once again conclude by thanking Nishith for his leadership and his initiative in promoting this discussion. Thank you, and have a good night, and have a good day in the US.